Chaos, also known as both the Primordial Annihilator and the Primordial Truth, depending upon one's point of view, is a term and concept that is synonymous with both the energies and corrupting influence of warp space, a plane of existence that is known to many as the Realm of Chaos. While many of the galaxy's races will make use of the warp in some form or another, such as for the purpose of faster than light travel, or for psychically sensitive individuals to manifest their own unique powers and abilities, such power is in itself akin to that of a poisoned chalice. Indeed, overexposure to the energies of the warp, particularly in the case of undisciplined or weak-minded individuals, will more often than not lead towards what is commonly known as chaotic corruption. Such corruption can manifest in a number of different ways, be it in the form of spiritual degradation or even physical mutation, which some might even be generous enough to describe as being a state of evolution or even ascension. Those individuals that dedicate themselves to the beings known as the Chaos Gods will typically display the greatest and most obvious signs of corruption, often sporting a number of gifts, such as pronounced horns, tentacles or crab-like claws in the place of limbs, wings or other such unnatural additions to their bodies. The corrupting influence of chaos, however, is not solely limited to living creatures, for inanimate objects such as weaponry, armor, and even vehicles can also become tainted in a similar manner, such as by becoming monstrous fusions of organic and technological components, developing a number of spine-like protrusions, or even, in some cases, gaining a degree of predatory sentience. While some will willingly choose to embrace such corruption in exchange for power or glory, others will succumb to the taint of chaos purely by accident or even due to the actions of others. An example of the latter was shown during the later years of the Horus Heresy, where Mortarion, the Primarch of the Death Guard, would offer up both himself and his entire legion to Nurgle, the Chaos God of Pestilence and Decay, in exchange for relief from their suffering at the hands of the Destroyer Plague. Thanks to the actions of their Primarch, the Death Guard Legion would be forever changed, becoming bloated with rotten disease, but also blessed with incredible toughness and near inability to feel pain. Regardless as to whether or not such corruption was deliberately sought out, any individuals discovered to be harboring the taint of chaos within the Imperium of Man will typically be branded as heretics or deviants before being subsequently hunted down and purged by Imperial authorities, be they the enforcers of the Adeptus Arbites, members of the Ecclesiarchy, or even, in the most extreme cases, warriors of the Adeptus Astartes. As a result, many individuals tainted by the powers of chaos will often flee towards regions of space where both the material and immaterial realms intertwine with one another, such as the warp space rift known as the Eye of Terror, in order to seek sanctuary with chaos cults, pirate clans, or traitor legion warbands. Over time, some tainted individuals will become increasingly corrupted until one of two fates befalls them. They will either achieve immortality and become transformed into warp entities themselves, becoming a type of being known as a demon prince, or they will devolve into gibbering, mindless abominations known as Chaos Spawn. While the Imperium is typically known for adopting more of a shoot first, ask questions later policy when dealing with those who have been deemed as being corrupted by the powers of chaos, there is one question that still needs to be asked. Is it in any way possible to ever, for want of a better term, undo the effects of chaotic corruption? Initially, such an idea would appear to be utterly impossible, due to the fact that chaotic corruption appears to be capable of altering the very DNA of those who succumb to it. An example of this is shown with Fulgrim, the Primarch of the Emperor's Children Traitor Legion, who himself had become possessed by a demonic entity during the final hours of the Istvan V Dropside Massacre. When the Primarch's blood was studied by Fabius Bile, the Legion's chief apothecary, as detailed within the short story The Reflection Cracked, Bile would know that the Primarch's DNA and very molecular structure was undergoing a process of metamorphosis, one which, unbeknownst to the Legion, was preparing Fulgrim for his eventual ascension to demonhood, as detailed with the following quote.
"A change in the composition of his blood and flesh. It is as though his molecular structure has begun to dissolve the bonds linking its constituent parts into a cohesive whole. It's quite fascinating, you understand. It is as though his form is preparing for some great ascension, a wondrous shedding of a redundant form, as his flesh is remade into something extraordinary.
It has even been noted that Astartes within the less religiously inclined traitor legions, such as the Iron Warriors, will even amputate any limbs or other such extremities that have become transformed by the corrupting influence of chaos, instead choosing to replace such undesirable mutations with cybernetic prostheses so as to retain as much of their humanity as possible. But this in itself isn't truly reversing the taint of chaos, as it could be argued that such methods merely delay the inevitable. In either case, it is still nonetheless theoretically possible to utilize the energies of the warp in some capacity in order to undo the effects of chaotic corruption. While such a notion may initially seem somewhat unlikely, there is a precedent for this particular hypothesis. Following the creation of the gargantuan warp rift known as the Cicatrix Maledictum, as detailed within the novel Lords of Silence, Sabatine, the homeworld of the White Consuls chapter, would come under a joint assault from both a Death Guard warband known as the Lords of Silence and the Weeping Veil chapter of the Wordbearers Legion. While the traitors wreaked untold havoc upon the Loyalists, it was during the course of the battle that Vaux, the siege master of the Lords of Silence, would learn that Morjalchek, the Dark Apostle of the Weeping Veil, planned on betraying Vaux and his men following the culmination of the battle. Vaux would then teleport into the ruins of the White Consul's Fortress Monastery in order to confront the Dark Apostle. But as Vaux's body began to materialize following the teleportation process, he would, but for the briefest of moments, appear as his original, uncorrupted self before reverting back into the Plague Marine that he had long since become, as detailed with the following passage.
Vaux shudders into being at the opposite end of the nave, far from both the pulpit and Dragon's Vantage, his outline clattering with broken hoarfrost, his scythe glassily caked in it. As the ether winds gust, he looks briefly magnificent, unveiled into hidden splendor with bone-pale armor and an erect, warlord-like bearing, before the clouds thicken about him again. His spine curves and his battleplate curdles, and he is just Vaux once more. The Siege Master, relic of the ancient world thrust like a canker into the agonized present.
Since Vaux, during the course of the teleportation process, was described as briefly appearing as he once did prior to the events of the Horus Heresy, before fully materializing as his modern corrupted self, it stands to reason that, at least in theory, it's entirely possible to exercise the taint of chaos from one's body, much like how one is able to strain liquid through a sieve. Because the teleportation process utilized by both the forces of chaos as well as the Imperium involves transitioning through the very depths of warp space, this would appear to suggest that the energies of the warp, in addition to being the very catalyst that can lead to chaotic corruption in the first place, can also serve as the proverbial cure. However, as to how one would go about utilizing such powers to expunge the taint of chaos is an altogether different matter. It is, however, possible, at least from a hypothetical standpoint, that the energies of a sufficiently powerful psyker can indeed, for lack of a better term, purify those that succumb to chaotic corruption. This particular notion is partially supported within the novel Wolfsbane. During the Battle of Trisolian, which took place during the later years of the Horus Heresy, Horus, the Primarch of the Sons of Horus, during his battle with Leman Russ, the Primarch of the Space Wolves, would be impaled by the Dionysian Spear, a weapon forged by and imbued with the energies of the Emperor himself. This act would temporarily drive the corrupting influence of the Chaos Gods from Horus's body, allowing a spark of the man he once was to return to the surface, although the War Master would eventually revert to being a pawn of the ruinous powers following the culmination of the battle. Not only this, but during the battle upon the Vengeful Spirit during the Siege of Terra, when Horus and the Emperor faced off against one another in mortal combat, the War Master would once again have the taint of chaos driven from his body after the Emperor struck him with a focused blast of psychic energy. As such, should an individual be subjected to concentrated amounts of psychic energy, it would indeed appear possible to expunge the taint of chaos from both their body and soul. However, whether such an act would be capable of undoing any biological changes caused by the taint of chaos remains somewhat unclear, for it should be noted that in these particular instances, the type of corruption expunged from Horus's body appeared to be purely spiritual in nature. Alternatively, since the taint of chaos is in itself linked to the energies of the warp, then perhaps such corruption can be reversed by utilizing the presence of blanks. Blanks, also known as nulls and untouchables, are a type of individual that produces a negative warp presence, which in turn renders them immune to warp-based energies, making them the perfect countermeasure to unleash against psychers. Because the very presence of a blank is capable of nullifying the very energies of the warp around them, then in theory, the corrupting influence of chaos could be expunged from those individuals whose bodies are saturated with warp-based energies should they remain within close proximity to a blank for an extended period of time, although this in itself is purely conjecture and speculation. But while it would indeed appear to be possible to undo the effects of chaotic corruption within mortals, it would, at least from an initial glance, remain impossible to purify those individuals that have long since ascended to demonhood. After all, once a mortal being achieves apotheosis, they will shed their physical forms and transform into a being comprised entirely of warp energy, which in turn renders them, for all intents and purposes, immortal. That being said, however, it has been suggested that a small number of beings, such as Isha, the Eldari goddess of healing, as well as the Emperor himself, have the power to undo the effects of apotheosis, and in turn render demon princes mortal once more. This particular train of thought appears to be one that is held by none other than Roboute Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, for as detailed within the novel Godblight, Guilliman, after seemingly having his powers temporarily augmented by those of the Emperor himself, alludes to the possibility that his brother Mortarion, now a demon prince of Nurgle, may one day find redemption, as detailed with the following quote.
"You are a traitor. You have brought low all that could have been, but you are as much a victim as a monster, Mortarion. Perhaps one day you might be saved. Until then, you must go back to the master you chose."
Whatever the truth of the matter, it would appear that it is indeed at least somewhat possible to undo the effects of chaotic corruption, even if only to a limited extent. What do you think? Leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.